In this video tutorial, I would like to take you through the segmentation process. On the left-hand side of the screen, we've got a series of toolbars. So under configuration, we have two icons here representing the segmentation of the maxillary model and segmentation of the mandibular model. The process for segmenting each arch is exactly the same. So we'll start off by segmenting the maxillary model. Once we click on the icon, the lower model disappears and we are presented with an occlusal view of the upper model. There are 4 stages to segmentation. The first stage is whereby we set the distal and mesial points. This software will then automatically identify the margin of the teeth, which we can agree, accept, change if required. We also have some functionality here where we can sculpt the teeth and in order to remove any artifacts and so on. And then finally we can define the center of rotation. And when we're done, we'll be left with a model on screen which has all the teeth segmented, all the margins clearly defined, all the long axes defined. So the first stage of the process we're presented with is where we need to set the points. Once we click on that, the software then presents a full arch here showing all the teeth. Our first step here is to identify which teeth we have and which teeth are missing. So obviously our 8s are gone, or don't exist on the model anyway. So we can highlight the tooth and then click on the missing checkbox. If we've made a mistake, we can check the box again and you'll see then that the tooth reappears. So we have everything else apart from those two. I'm now going to click on the lower left hand side of the chart. We always like to work in a clockwise manner. So as we click on our points, various points around the model, the cursor will jump from one tooth to the next tooth to the next tooth automatically. So the first thing we need to do here is to define the distal and mesial points. So we're on our second molar and we can zoom in slightly, and we're going to select our distal mesial points. When we select our distal mesial points, we like to rotate the model such that we're looking along the long axis of the model, the long axis of the tooth. And the reason for this is such that when we select the distal mesial points, if I stop here just for a moment and review what we've got, when we select the distal and mesial points, we're doing a number of things. We're saying to the software, the distance between this point and this point is the width of the tooth. We're also saying to the software, the midpoint of the line between this point and this point is the center of rotation, or the center of the long axis of the tooth. And also, the software is using those 2 points to define a frame of reference. It's our message to the software that these are the boundaries of the tooth, let's say. And the software will then use that information and use the view that we are in when we make that, identify those points, to use that view in order to define the long axis. So when selecting the points for this premolar, I'm viewing, taking an occlusal view of the tooth, and the software has created this red arrow or red line to indicate the long axis. When I was working on this molar, this is the view I was in when I was selecting the distal and mesial points. And similarly for this. Now we can make adjustments to that, we can tweak that and modify it. That's not a problem. So we do like to give it some consideration when we are selecting the points, but of course we can make some adjustments if necessary. So we're going to jump on to the next tooth, which is at the canine. You can see the little green arrow here, the cursor is indicating that it is waiting for us to select the distal and mesial points on that tooth. And again, rotating the model as we go, we select the distal and mesial points. And when we're done, we just like to review them model, we can rotate and make sure we're happy with everything. So just over here on the left hand side, we've got two icons to set the distal and mesial points and to set the tooth axis. So if I click on set the tooth axis, you'll see that the options down here have changed somewhat. So this is the point now where we can review the long axis that we've selected or defined, and we can make changes. As we look at the model, as we rotate the model such that we're viewing it from the side, we now have a center of rotation. The center of rotation is established, and we can adjust the direction of the long axis if we wish. Now you will notice that it can be a bit confusing with so many long axes present at the same time. So we move over to the top right hand side, and we have an icon here that allows us to show all teeth axes. If I click on a little dot, it removes them from the screen. So we can turn them on and turn them off. When we have the long axis turned off, then the software only shows the long axis for the active tooth. So this second molar is the active tooth. We're seeing the long axis for that and that only. And we can click around each of the individual teeth. Alternatively, if we click and hold the Alt key on the keyboard, the Control key, if we click and hold the Control key, then we can click on the tooth, and that tooth becomes the active tooth. So we click on the tooth in question, and we can make an adjustment to the long axis. An alternative method for adjusting the long axis is to again make the tooth active, and we can use this icon down the bottom left hand side, set tooth axis. If we click on that, it now makes the long axis of the tooth perpendicular to the view that we're in at this point in time. It's also worth noting that we've got a green dot. The center position, the position of the long axis, or the position of the center of rotation, is defined. It's defined by the midpoint between the distal and mesial points. But if we feel that it's maybe not an accurate representation, we can reposition it. We can click and drag that to any position we want. So particularly when we want to do some treatment planning, we want to move teeth around on screen and visualize how the case may look before or after treatment, well then we do need to give some consideration to the center of rotation. Once we're happy with that, we can then move on to the next stage. So we click on next, and the software is now trying its best to identify the margins for each of those teeth. And we can review each tooth, and you will notice that for the majority of cases the software has done a really good job. And you'll see in this particular tooth here we do need to make some adjustment. So we highlight the tooth, and we've got control points. We can click and drag those control points to an appropriate position. That's one way of changing the margin. An alternative way is to use the fast edit mode. So we have a checkbox here, click on that, allows us to fast edit, and that means we can click and drag and draw in the ideal margin. And we can jump from one tooth to the next using the control key. Hold the control key down and click on the tooth, and that tooth becomes active. But you can see that the software did a great job at identifying all of the margins, so there's very little work that we need to do there. Once we're happy with that, we click on next. And the software now is confirming each one of those lines that we've defined, and it's segmenting each tooth to turn that each tooth into an individual entity. We have some sculpting tools if we care to use them. So the first tool here looks like a little spray can, like a little aerosol can, and that allows us to add and remove material from the surface of the teeth. Why would we like to do that? Well, it could be an artifact that we want to remove, or we might like to simulate to the patient what attachments might look like, or brackets, or some kind of defect, or maybe there is a defect in the tooth and we just want to, maybe a chip on a tooth, and we just want to clean that up, make it look a little bit more presentable. So we can add material, we can remove material, and we can smooth material. So if we consider the add option, so we highlight the tooth, we selected the tooth in question, make that the relevant tooth, and we can add material. You can see I'm brushing some material onto the tooth there, or we can remove material. And we can smooth material. So it's not so applicable in this situation, but when there's kind of sharp defects on the surface of a tooth, it's useful to just smooth away any harshness that might be there. And the good news is that we can, of course, undo any of the adjustments that we've made. The diameter of the circle in question is controlled by this little slide bar, and the intensity of the addition or removal of material is controlled by this. So you can see we've got a quite an aggressive rate of adding material there. We can use the difference map. It gives us a color-coded map showing us where any modifications were made, if we need to find that out. Of course, we'll undo all of that good work, and we're left with the tooth as it was. Now, in this particular case, there are no artifacts, but perhaps if there was, let's simulate a small little defect on the surface of that tooth. Okay, so let's say that was a little bleb of material. It was an air hole that was in the surface in the impression, or perhaps in the model. If we go to the little icon here that looks like a plaster or a band-aid, we can now just adjust that. We can draw in an area, and when we click apply, the software deletes out everything that's in that area and then fills it in again. So it's a really neat way of deleting any artifacts. If we want to build up some material onto the surface of that tooth, just there in the corner perhaps, we'll go to add material. Perhaps we'll just reduce the intensity there. And it does take a skilled hand to make a good job at this, but let's give it a go. Okay, so we might build it up somewhat, and then we can go in with our smoothing tool. So you'll see we've built it up, slightly jagged edge on it, but we can go in with a smoothing tool, just run that over the surface of the tooth, and you can see that we've removed the harshness that was there. Sometimes we like to do this when we're doing treatment planning for a patient, and if there's any tooth wear or chipped teeth, it's a nice simple way of just tidying it up a little bit. So once we're happy with that, we click on next, and the software then gives us the opportunity to define the center of rotation. Now if I click on this icon up here and on the visibility scale, it allows us to see the long axis for each tooth. So the long axis, or the center of rotation for each tooth, is defined. And you can see there, judging by each tooth, that they are ranging in length. So there is some science behind this in terms of the incisors tending to have longer roots, so they've got a longer center of rotation. We can click on each one of those teeth, click on each one of those long axes and adjust the position of the center of rotation if we feel that it's necessary. And it's just a matter of clicking and dragging to reduce its length or increase its length. And once we're happy with that, we click on Done. The model doesn't appear to be any different on screen. However, when we go over to this icon on the right hand side, the teeth segmentation mode, you can see that now the teeth are colored white, the soft tissue is colored pink, and we have an opportunity then, using the toolbars on the top right hand side, to hide and show each part of the model. So we can slide it and increase or decrease the level of visibility by sliding the appropriate slider bar. We can also just turn it off and turn it on again. So I hope you found it useful, and of course if you have any problems, you know where we are. You can always feel free to email us at support@esmdigitalsolutions.com or give us a call and we'd be glad to help you out.